All right, so let's get right into it. We're about to tackle one of the biggest, oldest questions out there. Do we actually have free will? But, we're not going to sit around with some stuffy old philosophy books. Now, we're going to figure this out with guns. Lots of guns. Because our guide through this whole maze of fate and choice, it's the most unlikely philosopher you could ever imagine. The one and only John Wick. So this question, which gets thrown at John right at the start of chapter 2, it's more than just some throwaway line from a bad guy. It's basically the key to this whole thing. It unlocks the entire puzzle of who he is, and maybe who we are too. I mean, think about it. Can you ever really find peace if your past is always calling the shots? That's what we're here to figure out. All right, section 1, the assassin's choice. So let's talk about our guide, John Wick. The Baba Yaga. The man you hire to take out the boogeyman himself. He's an absolute artist when it comes to his violent craft. A total virtuoso of vengeance. And yet, for all that incredible skill, he seems like he might just be the least free person on the entire planet. And this is the paradox, right? He's the ultimate killing machine, a true master of his craft, but you get the sense he's just hopelessly trapped. He can take down an army of assassins, no problem. But he's chained down by something you can't see, something way more powerful, his own past. It's like every move he makes to get free just pulls those chains even tighter. He's the king of his world, but he's a prisoner of his own story. So this really brings us to the heart of the matter. Is he actually making choices here, or are the choices kind of making him? When you see John Wick in action, is that a real conscious decision, a moment of pure free will? Or is he just an actor playing out a script that was written for him years ago by the choices he's already made? That's the question we're going to dig into. Next up, the freedom debate. Okay, so to really get a handle on what's going on with John Wick, we got to pull back a little. We're leaving the world of secret societies and headshots for a minute and stepping into the ancient arena of philosophy. Get ready for the heavyweight championship of the world, free will versus determinism. So in one corner of the ring, you've got this idea called causal determinism. Now, the concept is pretty simple, but its implications are, they're huge. It basically says that every single event is forced to happen because of all the events and conditions that came before it. It's just one long, unbroken chain of cause and effect that stretches all the way back to the beginning of the universe. The philosopher Alex Rosenberg puts it perfectly. He says, what goes on in our heads is as fixed and determined by prior events as what goes on when one domino topples another in a long row of them. Think about that. The domino effect. From this point of view, your thoughts, your decisions, they aren't some spontaneous spark of genius. They're just the next domino in a line that was set in motion long, long before you were even born. This leads to something called the consequence argument, and it goes a little something like this. If determinism is true, then we have zero control over the past, right? And we have zero control over the laws of nature. So if our present actions are just consequences of the past and the laws of nature, then we have no control over them either. It means your choices are as out of your hands as gravity is. And this brings us right back to John Wick. I mean, that blood oath he owes Santino, the marker, it is a perfect example of this in action. It's a consequence of his past that he absolutely cannot escape. He can't go back in time and not make that oath. And the rules of his world, the rules of the high table, are as unbreakable as the laws of physics. So what's the consequence? Santino shows up on his doorstep. John has no choice. The domino had to fall. So in this big debate, you've basically got two main camps. First, there's incompatibilism. These guys argue that free will and determinism are totally exclusive. You can't have both. It's one or the other. Then you have compatibilism, and they argue that, hey, maybe they can coexist. Maybe you can have your deterministic cake and eat it with free will too. Okay, part 3, science of the mind. So we've heard what the philosophers have to say, but what about science? What happens if we look inside the human brain? Can neuroscience actually show us the moment of choice? Can we find free will hiding in our neurons? So let's talk about the famous Leavitt experiment. Here's how it worked. A person is told to just flick their wrist at any random moment they choose. Simple enough. All they have to do is look at a clock and note the exact time they consciously decide, okay, I'm going to move now. But while this is happening, their brain activity is being measured. And here's the kicker, the really wild part. The brain showed a spike of activity, what they call a readiness potential, about half a second before the person was even aware that they had made a decision.
Let me say that again. Your brain starts acting before you even know you're going to act.
So, what does that mean? Is your conscious self, the you that you think of as you, is it just a passenger along for the ride? Are you just watching a story that your brain has already written? A movie that's already started playing? It kind of makes you wonder if that feeling of making a choice is just your brain's press secretary telling you a nice story after the fact.
Okay, next section, the moral calculus. So, if our choices might be determined or at least started by our subconscious brain, then maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not about if we can choose, but how we should choose. This leads us to a totally different way of looking at things, not based on some mystical idea of freedom, but on something more like moral math. And this is where a philosophy called utilitarianism comes in. A guy named Jeremy Bentham was a big proponent of this. The basic idea is to create like an algorithm for happiness. You toss out all the complicated, abstract ideas of good and evil. Instead, the best action, the right action, is just the one that creates the most happiness and the least suffering for the most people possible. It's really just a simple cost-benefit analysis for human well-being. And when I say Bentham wanted an algorithm, I mean he took that literally. He actually came up with something called the calculus of felicity. I'm not kidding, it's a real formula he designed to try and mathematically prove which choice was the most ethical. It was supposed to calculate the exact amount of pleasure or pain any given action would cause. Okay, I know that formula looks insane, but in practice, the idea is much simpler. Think of it like the world's most detailed pros and cons list. You're just doing a cost-benefit analysis for happiness. You weigh the potential pleasure against the potential pain, you add up the scores, and whichever option comes out on top, well, that's your most ethical choice, according to the math. Now, Bentham thought this greatest good principle could be applied to, well, to everything. And he meant it. He used this logic to argue for all sorts of things, but he also applied it to something a little more unexpected. He used it to design a whole new type of prison.
And this is it. It's called the panopticon. It's a prison designed so that a single guard can see every inmate, but the inmates never know if they're being watched at any given moment. From Bentham's point of view, this was pure genius. The idea that you might be watched would force everyone to behave, maximizing order and minimizing trouble. It's the greatest good for the prison as a whole. But man, it is a chilling reminder of how a philosophy aimed at happiness can end up justifying total surveillance and control. Okay, final section, a cycle of violence. We've talked about determinism, we've looked at brain science, we've even dug into utilitarian prisons. So now let's bring it all back to where we started. Back to John Wick. Let's apply all this and see if we can finally figure this out. Is he free? I think this quote really just says it all, doesn't it? Violence begets chaos, begets a shit ton more violence. Honestly, that might be the best summary of the John Wick saga ever. It doesn't really matter why the fight starts or what codes of honor they pretend to have. The end result is always, always the same. And here's the crazy part. Despite all their rules and codes of honor, it doesn't matter why John makes his choices. Whether it's free will or a determined chain of events or a signal from his brain, it all leads to the exact same place: more violence. Every single choice he makes, every person he kills to try and get out, just traps him deeper. He's caught in a loop. He's trapped not just by what he's done, but by the inevitable fallout of what he's doing right now. And that leaves us with one last question, and this one's for you. If every single choice you make puts limits on your next one, how free are you, really? John Wick's world is obviously an exaggeration, but the principle is the same. Every decision we make closes some doors and opens others, setting up the board for the next move. So take a look at the chain of events, the dominoes that fell, to bring you to this exact moment. How much of that path was really your choice?